Welcome back, casual gardeners. It's going to sound a little bit weird coming from a guy who gardens almost exclusively in raised beds, but today we're going to talk about reasons you should not garden in a raised bed. These aren't just stupid little clickbaity reasons. These are some good reasons that maybe raised beds might not be for you. I'm going to hang a bird feeder on this. So the biggest, most important reason you should not garden in a raised bed is that it's an unnecessary expense. I spent over $1,000 on my cute little garden, and I do not regret it. But this insistence on YouTubers gardening in raised beds means that a lot of new gardeners are probably feeling like, I can't afford raised beds, therefore I can't afford to garden. If you have earth and a crummy little shovel and some seeds and some water, you can garden. It's not going to look as good, but you can still grow some food. Now, depending on who you talk to, people are going to say you have to have a raised bed, because if you don't have a raised bed, you can't improve your soil as easily. And if you can't improve your soil as easily, you're gonna suck at gardening. That's not true. Human beings on Earth have been gardening in various types of soil for 10,000 years at least, and they were doing it without plows and without plumbing, and they were just fine. So when it comes to raised beds, no, you don't need them to be successful. They are super expensive, and if cost is a barrier to you gardening, it's better to just get your seeds in the dirt and grow some food and not worry about building a raised bed. Now, there are ways that you can reduce the cost of building raised beds if you really think you have to. For instance, instead of paying for cedar or one of the more long-lasting woods with oils that prevent rot, I went with Douglas fir, and I just built my beds so that they were easy to replace the boards from. That's an option you can take, but I mean, again, I still spend over $1,000 on that. Alternatively, you can use found materials. You can use wood from pallets, which is often free, but then the hardware you're using is not free. Do you have the tools on hand? There are just a lot of other costs to building raised beds. And you can do all of the soil amendments and all of the pretty little rows and decorative touches. You can do all that without raised beds. There we go. Just need to give my bird feeders a chance to dry out after a thorough cleaning. And this is going to be a fantastic place for a little cat TV show. Second reason you should not plant in raised beds is that raised beds require more upkeep than in-ground beds. You're going to have to deal with your soil receding every year, and I think it happens to everybody. If you have raised beds and your soil doesn't recede every year, let me know in the comments, and above all, tell us all your secret. Because I have to add, usually compost, every single year to my raised beds in order to keep them full. I'm going to have to replace this Douglas fir as it degrades and decomposes over time, because it's not weather treated, it's not very sturdy, it just saves me money. And I've built that obsolescence into my raised bed design, but if you're gardening in ground, that's not a thing you have to worry about. If I wanted to till these raised beds, it would be more work than if they were not raised beds. So if you like tilling your garden, no, this is not for you. These are onions that I started from seed a little bit ago. I've also got some onion sets. I planted a bunch of onions last year and I had no success. So I'm going to be trying both ways this year and seeing which one works best, because I'm gardening in a new climate now and apparently the rules are different. Raised beds can be less water efficient. If you live somewhere with incredibly freely draining soil or somewhere that gets very hot in the summers, I'm thinking about you guys in Vegas, gardening in a raised bed is definitely not for you because you're going to lose too much water and your plants are going to dry out. Here in Logan, Utah, that is a feature, not a bug, because I have clay soil. But even if you have clay soil, you don't have to garden in a raised bed to deal with your clay soil. You can amend your soil in the ground and save yourself a lot of effort building raised beds. I think that is particularly important in a lot of climates since we've been having some dry years in parts of the United States. Can you afford to water your garden more? If the answer is no, don't build raised beds. So another reason you should not garden in raised beds is that depending on their size, so this is going to be more of a problem in smaller raised beds, you may find that you have much larger temperature swings with the seasons. It's going to get a lot colder in the spring and the fall, and it's going to get a lot warmer in the summer. And I know I already mentioned something similar with regard to water efficiency, but this is a different issue. Temperature swings mean that, say you live where I live and you're still getting killing frosts, they mean that your plants in the soil are less likely to survive that killing frost late in the spring than they would if you were growing in the ground. And that can be a big deal in the spring if you're dealing with spring fever and you don't want to lose your crops. So that is an issue that raised bed gardeners deal with more than in-ground gardeners. And there are ways that you can get around it if you didn't have to do special little tricks to figure out how not to deal with those temperature swings. Isn't that better? I think it might be. I got way more sets than I needed. These were, I think, $8. I'm gonna have to find a neighbor to share these with. I need to hurry up and get these beets in the ground before it's too late. Luckily, the weather is finally feeling like it's on my side. Raised beds can be a lot less space efficient. A common design consideration of raised beds is that you want to be able to fit your wheelbarrow and other equipment between the beds for when you are amending soil and harvesting and doing all those other fun things that gardeners get to do. If your beds are raised, it's a lot harder to squeeze a wheelbarrow between them, and you have to build in a bigger space allowance in your paths. Whereas in the ground, well, you can push your plants aside to a certain extent without damaging them, but you can't push a raised bed out of the way, so things get a bit tighter for you if you don't make sure you've got those paths designed in to your garden. Back in February, I made a video about beautiful spring blooming flowers that you can plant early to help fight spring fever. And it didn't get a lot of views, but one thing it did do is it encouraged me to pick up some snapdragons, some violas, and some pansies. So I've got to plant those as well. This was an impulse purchase. You know how that goes. Now, another issue you can run into with raised beds is they're not great on a slope. So if you have sloping terrain, you might struggle with raised beds. Sloping terrain is going to be a problem for just about anyone, so I don't think it should be a deal breaker. If you're gardening on a slope, you do what you need to do, man. And you're very brave to do it. and we all admire you. Now, it's super reasonable for you to ask, Dustin, obviously you're growing in raised beds. Why are you telling us not to do it? Well, I'm not telling you not to do it. I'm giving you reasons not to do it. Because maybe expense is a barrier for you getting into the hobby. I don't want you feeling like you can't be a gardener just because you can't afford to build a raised bed. And I don't want you thinking, as many of these YouTube channels might make you think, that raised beds are just a magical solution to all the problems you might run into in a garden. Because they're not. They do solve some problems, but they come with their own set of problems. And while there are plenty of videos focusing on why you should garden in a raised bed, I don't see a lot of them talking about the problems. So why did I get into raised bed gardening? My first garden actually had perfect soil. I got into raised bed gardening because a YouTuber convinced me it was a good idea. And I've stuck with raised bed gardening, not because I need to, but because I like the aesthetic, and I've just kind of grown around the habits that come with raised bed gardening, and it suits my personal preference not to till my soil. So it matches me well enough, and I'm happy doing it. And if you want to grow in a raised bed, despite everything I've said, you should do it. It's just not necessary most of the time. I am sometimes very aware that I could be growing twice as much food in this space as I am. So if you're of a survivalist state of mind, this is definitely not for you. It's important to remember, whenever you do any planting, you gotta water it in. That'll help get your roots established and kind of work out any air gaps from the disturbed soil. You'll be a lot more successful if you do it. If you've been admiring this t-shirt, I want to remind you that it is available in my merch. And this is a design I did all by myself like a big boy. This is casual gardening art. And kind of a dad joke, because that's how I roll. I hope you liked this video. If you did, don't forget to hit that like button. It helps me out as a YouTuber. Subscribe to my channel if this is something you think you might, maybe it'll help you fall asleep. Whatever. I don't care. Just watch it all the way through. Thank you so much for joining me here in my garden today. I hope you have a wonderful time in your own.